When 78-year-old Amanda Cruz discovered her deceased husband's wedding ring missing, she was devastated to learn her daughter Emma had sold it for $50 to pay medical bills. Racing to the pawn shop, Amanda found the ring had already been sold to collector Raymond Silver for $250. But when appraiser Frank Kowalski examined the simple gold band, shocking truths emerged. The ring was worth $25,000 and bore a hidden inscription revealing David's secret first marriage during WWII. Amanda's quest to reclaim her most precious possession would uncover buried family history and forge unexpected friendships. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Amanda Cruz's bedroom, casting familiar shadows across the mahogany dresser that had belonged to her mother. At 78, Amanda moved with the deliberate care of someone who had learned that rushing led to stumbles, but her steps held purpose as she began the ritual that had sustained her through 2 years of widowhood. She filled the electric kettle in her small kitchen, listening to the comforting hum as it heated water for her morning tea. David had always been a coffee man, strong and black, but Amanda preferred the gentle ceremony of steeping chamomile, the way the steam carried memories of her grandmother's kitchen in San Antonio. While the tea brewed, she returned to the bedroom, settling into the worn velvet chair beside the dresser. The jewelry box sat exactly where it had for 35 years, a modest wooden case with brass hinges that David had given her for their first anniversary. Amanda's fingers traced the smooth surface before lifting the lid, revealing the small collection of treasures within. Her mother's pearl earrings, the silver cross from her confirmation, a few pairs of simple gold hoops for special occasions. But it was the ring she sought, the ring that lived in the small velvet compartment at the center of the box. David's wedding band, warm gold worn smooth by decades of his touch, had become her morning companion. Each day she would lift it from its resting place, hold it up to the light, and polish it with the soft cloth she kept beside it. The weight of it in her palm connected her to him across the impossible distance of death. Amanda's hand reached automatically for the familiar circle of gold, her fingers expecting the reassuring touch of smooth metal. Empty. The velvet compartment stared back at her, a small dark cave where David's ring should have been. Amanda blinked hard, certain her aging eyes were playing tricks. She lifted the entire jewelry box, tilting it toward the window for better light, but the compartment remained stubbornly vacant. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. "No, no, no." Her hands began to shake as she carefully removed each item from the jewelry box, setting them on the dresser's surface with increasing urgency. The pearls, the cross, the earrings, everything else was exactly where it belonged. Only David's ring was missing. Amanda's breathing became shallow as she checked the floor around the dresser, getting down on her hands and knees despite the protest in her joints. The hardwood revealed nothing but dust particles dancing in the morning light. She opened every drawer in the dresser, her movements becoming more frantic as each search yielded nothing. The bedroom gave way to the bathroom, where she rifled through medicine cabinets and checked the small dish beside the sink where she sometimes placed jewelry while washing her hands. Nothing. The living room was next, cushions thrown aside, books moved from their careful arrangements on the coffee table. Amanda's usually meticulous home began to look ransacked as she tore through it with desperate efficiency. In the kitchen, she emptied drawers, checked windowsills, even looked inside the refrigerator, though she couldn't remember why she might have put the ring there. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the impossible became undeniable. David's ring was gone. The panic hit her like a physical blow. Amanda gripped the countertop, her knuckles white against the laminate surface as her vision tunneled and her chest tightened. The ring wasn't just jewelry. It was David himself, the tangible proof that their love had existed, that he had chosen her when she was 43 and convinced she'd missed her chance at marriage. It was the weight of his hand in hers during his final days in the hospital, the last thing she'd removed from his finger before they took him away. "Think, Amanda," she commanded herself aloud, her voice steadier than she felt. "When did you last see it?" "Yesterday morning, certainly." She remembered polishing it while thinking about their anniversary, which would have been next month. She'd held it up to the light, admiring how it caught the sun before placing it carefully back in the velvet compartment. She was sure of it. But as the seconds ticked by, doubt crept in. Was she remembering yesterday or the day before? How many mornings had blended together in the haze of grief and routine? At 78, after 2 years of living alone, could she trust her memory completely? The thought terrified her more than the missing ring itself. If she couldn't remember, if her mind was failing her the way David's body had failed him, then she was truly lost. Amanda forced herself to sit at the kitchen table and dial Emma's number with trembling fingers. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before Emma's voicemail message played. "Hi, you've reached Emma. I'm probably at the hospital, but leave a message and I'll call you back." "Emma, it's Mama. David's ring is gone. It's not in my jewelry box. It's not anywhere. I've looked everywhere. Please call me back as soon as you get this. Please, mija. I need you." She hung up and stared at the phone, willing it to ring immediately. Emma worked such long shifts at the hospital, sometimes 12 or 14 hours when they were short-staffed. She might not get the message for hours. Amanda returned to the bedroom and sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the jewelry box open beside her like an accusation. The velvet compartment seemed to mock her, this small space that had held the center of her world. She picked up the soft polishing cloth, still carrying the faint scent of metal polish, and pressed it to her cheek. 2 years. She had made it through 2 years of birthdays and holidays, of David's favorite songs on the radio and the empty space in their bed. She had learned to cook for one, to make decisions alone, to find reasons to get up each morning. But she had done it all with the ring as her anchor, the daily ritual that connected her to the man who had loved her completely for 35 years. Now, sitting in the morning light with the empty jewelry box beside her, Amanda Cruz felt more alone than she had since the day David died. The ring was gone, and with it, the last tangible piece of the love that had defined the second half of her life. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Cars starting, dogs barking, the distant sound of children getting ready for school. Life continued its relentless forward motion while Amanda sat frozen in time, holding a polishing cloth for a ring that was no longer there to polish. She closed her eyes and tried to remember David's voice, his laugh, the way he had looked at her on their wedding day when she was no longer young but felt beautiful in his gaze. But even those memories seemed suddenly fragile, as if losing the ring had somehow loosened her grip on everything else she held dear. The phone remained silent beside her, and Amanda realized that for the first time in 2 years, she didn't know what to do next. The phone finally rang at 3:15 in the afternoon, jolting Amanda from her vigil at the kitchen table where she had been sitting for hours, staring at the silent device as if willing it to life. She drank 4 cups of tea, eaten nothing, and reorganized the contents of her jewelry box 6 times, hoping, against logic, that David's ring would somehow materialize among the familiar pieces. "Mama?" Emma's voice sounded exhausted, carrying the strain of another double shift at Mercy General Hospital. "I just got your message. What's wrong? You said something about Dad's ring?" Amanda's composure, carefully maintained through hours of waiting, crumbled at the sound of her daughter's voice. "It's gone, Emma. David's wedding ring. It's not in my jewelry box. I've torn the house apart looking for it." There was a pause on the other end, longer than Amanda expected. In that silence, something cold settled in her stomach, an intuition born of 50 years of motherhood that told her Emma knew more than she was letting on. "Maybe you misplaced it, Mama. You know how you sometimes put things in different places and forget?" "I did not misplace it." Amanda's voice sharpened, cutting through Emma's gentle deflection. "I keep it in the same place every day. I've kept it there for 2 years. Someone took it, Emma. Someone was in my house and took the only thing I have left of your father." Another pause, this one filled with the sounds of a busy hospital in the background, pages echoing through corridors, the distant beeping of monitors, voices calling out medical terminology that Emma understood but Amanda did not. The institutional noises only emphasized the distance between them, not just physical, but emotional, generational. "Mama, I need to tell you something."
Emma's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and Amanda knew with the certainty of dread that her worst fears were about to be confirmed. I took the ring. The words hit Amanda like a physical blow. She gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white, her other hand pressing against her chest where her heart seemed to have stopped beating entirely. You what? I needed the money. Sophia's treatment. The insurance doesn't cover everything, and I'm already working 16-hour days. I thought it was just a simple gold band. I didn't think it was worth much, and I figured you wouldn't miss it right away. I was going to replace it with something similar before you noticed. Amanda's world tilted on its axis. The daughter she had raised, the nurse who dedicated her life to caring for others, the woman whom she had trusted with her spare key for emergencies, that daughter had crept into her home when she wasn't there and taken something that didn't—
When? 3 days ago. Mama, I was going to tell you. 3 days. Amanda calculated quickly. You've let me sit here for 3 days, wondering if my mind was failing me? Wondering if I was losing my memory like your father lost his strength? You let me think I was going crazy. I didn't know you were looking for it. I thought I had more time to figure out how to fix this. Fix this? Amanda laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. How exactly were you planning to fix this, Emma? Were you going to march into that pawn shop and demand it back? Were you going to somehow manufacture 35 years of memories to go with whatever cheap replacement you bought? Emma's sobs were audible now, full-bodied crying that Amanda recognized from Emma's childhood, from scraped knees and broken friendships, and the day Emma's marriage fell apart. But this time, Amanda felt no impulse to comfort, no maternal instinct to soothe her daughter's pain. I'll get it back, Emma said through her tears. I'll call the pawn shop right now. I'll explain the situation. Maybe they can contact the buyer. Maybe we can work something out. We? Amanda's voice could freeze water. There is no we in this, Emma. You created this mess. You violated my home, my trust, my grief. You turned the most important symbol of my marriage into gas money. It wasn't gas money, it was Sophia's medication. Do not hide behind that child's illness to justify what you did. You had choices, Emma. You could have called me. You could have asked your supervisor for an advance. You could have gone to a charity, applied for assistance, sold your own belongings. Instead, you chose to steal from your mother. Amanda hung up the phone with a decisive click, cutting off Emma's protestations and apologies. The silence that followed felt different from the morning's anxious waiting. This was the silence of decision, of bridges burned, of trust broken so completely that Amanda wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. She sat for a long moment, staring at the phone and waiting for it to ring again. When it did, she let it go to voicemail. Then again, and again. Emma could leave 100 messages, but Amanda wasn't ready to hear them. She needed time to process this betrayal, to figure out what came next. Finally, Amanda picked up the phone and dialed information, asking for the number of Rivera's pawn shop on 5th Street. Her voice was steady as she spoke to the operator, but inside her heart was breaking all over again. Not just for the ring, though that loss felt like losing David a second time, but for Emma, for the daughter who had been willing to wound her so deeply, and for the relationship between them that might never recover from this moment. The pawn shop's number connected on the second ring. Rivera's pawn shop? Carlos speaking. My name is Amanda Cruz, she said, her voice carrying the authority of 70 decades of living. My daughter sold you my husband's wedding ring 3 days ago, and I need to know who has it now. There was a pause, and when Carlos spoke again, his voice was gentler, touched with what sounded like genuine regret. Mrs. Cruz, I was wondering if someone might call about that ring. Your daughter seemed upset when she brought it in. I almost didn't buy it from her, but she said she really needed the money. Well, she got her money. $50 for 35 years of marriage. I hope it was worth it. Ma'am, I sold that ring yesterday to a regular customer, a collector named Raymond Silver, He buys a lot of vintage jewelry from me. I can give you his contact information if you'd like to try to get it back." Amanda closed her eyes, feeling a spark of hope for the first time since discovering the empty jewelry box. "Yes, please. I need that information." As Carlos gave her Raymond Silver's phone number and address, Amanda wrote it down with the careful precision of someone who understood that this might be her only chance to reclaim what she'd lost. The ring was gone, sold to a stranger who probably saw it as just another addition to his collection. But Amanda wasn't ready to give up, wasn't ready to let Emma's desperate decision be the final word in this story. She had spent 2 years learning how to live without David. She wasn't about to learn how to live without his memory, too. Amanda Cruz had never taken a taxi in her life. At 78, she had always relied on her own car for transportation, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that David had insisted on buying because it was reliable and economical. But this morning, as she stood in her driveway clutching the piece of paper with Raymond Silver's information, she realized her hands were shaking too badly to trust herself behind the wheel. The taxi driver, a young man with kind eyes and a slight accent she couldn't place, helped her into the back seat and listened patiently as she gave him the address for Rivera's pawn shop on 5th Street. She wanted to see where Emma had taken David's ring, wanted to understand how her daughter could have walked into such a place and handed over something so precious for such a pittance. "You okay, lady?" the driver asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror as they navigated the morning traffic. "You look a little pale." Amanda managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, thank you. Just handling some difficult business." The pawn shop sat wedged between a laundromat and a check-cashing place in a strip mall that had seen better days. The neon sign in the window flickered erratically, and security bars covered the glass storefront. Amanda paid the taxi driver and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, trying to imagine Emma walking through that door with David's ring in her pocket. A bell chimed as Amanda pushed open the heavy glass door, and she found herself in a cramped space filled with the detritus of other people's desperate moments. Guitar amplifiers sat next to costume jewelry, power tools were displayed alongside china sets, and everything was covered with a thin layer of dust that spoke of long waiting and uncertain redemption. Behind the counter stood a man in his 30s with calloused hands and tired eyes. He looked up from the inventory sheet he was reviewing and offered Amanda a cautious smile. "Can I help you? Are you Carlos Rivera?" "Yes, ma'am. You must be Mrs. Cruz. I was hoping you'd come in." Amanda studied his face, looking for signs of the callousness she expected from someone who made his living off other people's misfortune. Instead, she saw genuine discomfort, the expression of a man who wished he could undo something he'd already done. "I want to see where my daughter sold my husband's ring," Amanda said simply. Carlos nodded and gestured to the counter where Amanda now stood. "Right here. She came in around 10 in the morning, 3 days ago. She seemed conflicted about it, kept turning the ring over in her hands, like she was having second thoughts." "But you bought it anyway?" "Mrs. Cruz, I want you to understand something about my business. People come in here when they're desperate. Sometimes it's drugs, sometimes it's gambling, but usually it's just life. Medical bills, rent, keeping the lights on. Your daughter told me the money was for her daughter's medication. I have 2 kids myself. I understood her situation." Amanda's anger flickered, but she forced herself to listen. Carlos continued, his voice growing more earnest. "I offered her $60 for the ring, but she said 50 was enough. She just needed 50, exactly. That told me she wasn't here to make money. She was here to solve a specific problem. It made me feel better about the transaction." "You felt better about buying a wedding ring from someone's desperate daughter?" Carlos winced. "I felt better knowing she wasn't an addict looking for her next fix. Mrs. Cruz, I see a lot of pain in this job. Your daughter's pain felt clean, like she was a good person in a bad situation." Amanda looked around the shop again, taking in the guitars that someone's music dreams had forced them to abandon, the power tools that represented lost jobs and failed projects. Every item here had a story, and most of those stories ended in disappointment. Tell me about the man who bought it. He pulled out a file folder and flipped through several receipts. Raymond Silver. He's been a customer for about 5 years now, collects vintage jewelry, especially pieces from the 1940s and 1950s. He has an eye for quality. Sometimes he spots valuable pieces that other people miss. What do you mean by valuable? Well, like your husband's ring. Mr. Silver took one look at it and knew it was special. He examined it with a jeweler's loupe, checked the craftsmanship, the weight. He paid me $250 for it. Amanda closed her eyes, feeling the breath leave her lungs. $250? Yes, ma'am. I probably should have researched it more before I bought it from your daughter, but I was focused on helping her with her immediate need. Mr. Silver, though, he knows jewelry. He said it was definitely European, probably from the 1940s, and the gold content alone was worth more than what I had paid for it. The unfairness of it hit Amanda like a physical blow. Emma had sacrificed David's ring for $50, not knowing that it was worth 5 times that amount. The wedding band that seemed like a simple gold circle contained mysteries and value that none of us had recognized. I need to contact Mr. Silver, Amanda said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. I can give you his phone number, but Mrs. Cruz, I have to be honest with you. Mr. Silver is a serious collector. He doesn't usually sell pieces once he's acquired them. His penthouse apartment looks like a museum, everything perfectly displayed and cataloged. Carlos wrote down Raymond Silver's contact information on a piece.
Mr. Silver, my name is Amanda Cruz. You recently purchased my husband's wedding ring from Rivera's pawn shop. The ring was sold without my knowledge or permission, and I would very much like to discuss getting it back. Please call me at your earliest convenience. She left her number and hung up, then immediately dialed Frank Kowalski. Hello? The voice that answered was gravelly but warm, with the slight accent of someone who had learned English as a second language. Mr. Kowalski? My name is Amanda Cruz. Carlos Rivera at the pawn shop gave me your number. I need help recovering my husband's wedding ring. Ah, Frank said, and Amanda could hear the understanding in his voice. Another family treasure that ended up in the wrong place. Mrs. Cruz, would you be able to come to my office this afternoon? I think we need to discuss exactly what you're dealing with. As Amanda arranged a taxi to take her to Frank Kowalski's office, she felt something she hadn't experienced since discovering the empty jewelry box. Hope. Not the naive hope that this would be easy, but the determined hope of someone who had found allies in her fight to reclaim what mattered most. The ring was out there, sitting in Raymond Silver's collection, wearing its secrets like David had worn his quiet strength. But Amanda wasn't ready to give up, wasn't ready to let a stranger's appreciation for vintage jewelry be the final word in her love story. She had buried one husband and raised one daughter. She had survived 70 years of joy and loss, triumph and disappointment. Recovering one wedding ring from one stubborn collector should be manageable, she hoped. Frank Kowalski's home office occupied the converted garage of a modest bungalow in a tree-lined neighborhood that reminded Amanda of her own street. As she climbed the 3 steps to his door, she noticed the small brass nameplate that read, F. Kowalski, certified gemologist and appraiser, and felt a flutter of reassurance. This man had credentials, experience, and, according to Carlos Rivera, a heart for reuniting families with their lost treasures. Frank answered the door himself, a compact man with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and hands that moved with the precise grace of someone who had spent decades handling delicate objects. His smile was genuine as he welcomed Amanda inside, and she noticed that his eyes held the same kindness she'd seen in Carlos Rivera, the look of someone who understood that the objects people brought to him carried weight far beyond their material value. Mrs. Cruz, please come in. I've made coffee, but I also have tea if you prefer. The office was a fascinating mixture of organized chaos and meticulous care. Glass display cases lined the walls, filled with examples of different types of jewelry arranged by era and style. Amanda could see Art Deco brooches from the 1920s, Victorian mourning jewelry with its distinctive black stones, and mid-century modern pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum. But what caught her attention most were the photographs, dozens of them, covering one entire wall, showing people holding jewelry and smiling. Some were clearly professional shots, but many were candid family photos, thank you cards, and snapshots that spoke of successful reunions. "Those are my victories," Frank said, noticing her gaze. 43 years in this business, and those pictures represent the moments that made it all worthwhile. Every piece of jewelry has a story, Mrs. Cruz, but the best stories are the ones that find their way home. Amanda accepted a cup of tea and settled into the comfortable chair across from Frank's desk that was covered with reference books, magnifying equipment, and what appeared to be detailed charts showing different types of metalwork and gemstone cuts. "Tell me about your husband's ring," Frank said, pulling out a yellow legal pad and a pen. "Start from the beginning. When he got it, what it looked like, anything you remember about its history." Amanda took a breath and began the story she had never had to tell before, the story of David's ring. She described how David had worn it for 35 years, how it had never left his finger except for one brief period when he'd had surgery and we had to remove it temporarily. She talked about the simple gold band, how it had worn smooth over the decades, how it caught the light when David gestured while telling stories. Frank listened intently, making notes and asking occasional questions. What was the approximate width of the band? Did Amanda remember any markings inside? Was the gold yellow, white, or something in between? Had David ever mentioned where he'd gotten it, or whether it had been passed down through his family? David was never much for talking about his past, Amanda said, stirring her tea thoughtfully. He came to America from England in his 30s, and he always said he wanted to focus on the future we were building together rather than the past he'd left behind. I knew he'd been married before. He told me that when we started getting serious, but she said she died during the war, and it was too painful to discuss. Frank looked up from his notes. He'd been married before? Yes, but only briefly. She died in the London Blitz. David said they'd only been married about a year when it happened. He never talked about it, and I never pressed. We all have parts of our past that are too painful to revisit. Frank set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, studying Amanda's face with the careful attention of someone evaluating a particularly interesting specimen. "Mrs. Cruz, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Are you absolutely certain that the ring David wore during your marriage was his wedding ring from your marriage to you?" Amanda blinked, confused by the question. "Of course it was. We bought our rings together at Silverman's Jewelry downtown. Simple gold bands. Nothing fancy. We couldn't afford anything elaborate." "But you bought matching rings? His and hers?" "Yes, we—" Amanda paused, a memory surfacing that she had never examined closely before. "Actually, no. David already had a ring when we got engaged. He said he preferred to keep wearing it, that gold was gold, and there was no point in spending money on a new one when we were saving for the wedding and the house. I got a new ring, but David kept his." Frank nodded slowly, making another note on his pad. "Mrs. Cruz, I think your husband's ring might be more significant than any of you realized. If it's from his first marriage in the 1940s, and if it was made in England during wartime, it could be quite valuable. Precious metals were strictly rationed during World War II, so jewelry from that period often had unusual compositions and craftsmanship." He stood and walked to one of his reference books, pulling out a thick volume titled European Jewelry of the War Years, 1939 to 1945. During the war, many jewelers had to get creative with their materials and techniques. Some of the pieces from that era are now considered historically significant, especially if they can be traced to specific makers or regions. Amanda watched as Frank flipped through pages of photographs showing rings, brooches, and necklaces from the 1940s. Some of them looked remarkably similar to David's ring, simple gold bands that appeared unremarkable at first glance, but according to the text, contained rare metals or bore the marks of renowned craftsmen. How would we find out if David's ring is one of these historical pieces?
We need to examine it, Frank said. I have equipment here that can analyze the metal composition, and I can check for maker's marks or other identifying characteristics that might not be visible to the naked eye. But first, we need to get Raymond Silver to let us look at it. Frank reached for his phone. May I call Mr. Silver on your behalf? Sometimes these situations go more smoothly when approached by someone in the trade. Amanda nodded, grateful to have an expert handling the negotiation. She listened as Frank dialed and waited for an answer. Raymond, it's Frank Kowalski. I hope you're well. Yes, I'm calling about a ring you recently acquired from Rivera's pawn shop. I have the original owner here with me, and we'd like to discuss the piece with you. A 40s gold band, possibly English? Yes, that's the one. Frank covered the mouthpiece and whispered to Amanda. He remembers the ring. He's interested in its history. Raymond, the ring has significant sentimental value to Mrs. Cruz. It was her late husband's wedding ring, but we're also curious about its potential historical significance. Would you be willing to meet with us? Mrs. Cruz would like to see the ring again, and I'd like to examine it professionally if you're agreeable. Tomorrow afternoon would be perfect. Yes, we'll come to you. Frank hung up and turned to Amanda with a mixture of hope and caution in his expression. Good news and challenging news. The good news is that Raymond is fascinated by the ring and wants to know more about its history. He's agreed to meet with us tomorrow afternoon at his penthouse. The challenging news is that he's clearly already quite attached to it. He described it as a remarkable example of wartime craftsmanship and said he's never seen anything quite like it. Amanda felt her heart sink. He's not going to give it back, is he? Mrs. Cruz, I've learned that collectors like Raymond often value the story behind a piece as much as the piece itself. If we can help him understand what this ring means to you and your family, he might be willing to work something out. Collectors aren't usually heartless. They're passionate about preserving history and beauty. Sometimes they just need help understanding that the most important part of an object's history is still being written. Frank pulled out a business card and handed it to Amanda. Before tomorrow's meeting, I want you to gather any documentation you can find about David's past. Immigration papers, marriage certificates, anything that might help us trace the ring's history. The more we know about where it came from, the better position we'll be in to negotiate for its return. As Amanda prepared to leave, Frank walked her to the door, his expression thoughtful. Mrs. Cruz, I want you to understand that tomorrow might be difficult. When Raymond shows you the ring, you're going to see it displayed as part of his collection.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Amanda followed him across the room, her heart pounding as they approached the case. When she saw it, she had to grip Frank's arm to steady herself. There was David's ring, sitting in a small velvet-lined tray under perfect lighting, surrounded by other vintage pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum. The ring looked different somehow, cleaner, more lustrous than she remembered. Amanda realized that Raymond must have had it professionally cleaned and polished, revealing details and beauty that years of daily wear had obscured. "Ooh," she whispered, pressing her free hand to her chest. "There it is." Raymond opened the case with a small key and carefully lifted the ring, holding it so that Amanda could see it clearly. It's really quite remarkable. The craftsmanship is exceptional, and the gold content is much higher than you typically see in American jewelry from that period. I believe it's 18-karat gold, possibly even higher. Frank pulled out a jeweler's loupe and looked at Raymond questioningly. "May I?" "Of course. I'd welcome your professional opinion." Frank took the ring and examined it carefully under his magnifying glass, turning it slowly and studying every detail. Amanda watched his face change as he looked, his expression shifting from professional interest to something approaching excitement. "Raymond, have you examined the interior of the band?" "Briefly. There appears to be some engraving, but it's quite worn. I haven't had time to research it thoroughly." Frank continued his examination, then looked up at Amanda with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Cruz, I need to show you something. Are you prepared for the possibility that there might be information about this ring that you weren't aware of?"
Amanda nodded, though a chill of apprehension ran through her. What kind of information? Frank handed her the loop and guided her to position the ring so she could see inside the band. Look carefully at the interior surface, near where the engraving is. Amanda peered through the magnifying glass, squinting as she tried to make out the worn lettering inside the ring. At first, she could only see scratches and the general wear of decades, but gradually, letters began to emerge from the patina. E.R., she read slowly. Forever. D.R. 1943. The words hit her like a physical blow. Amanda straightened up, the loop still in her hand, staring at Frank with confusion and growing dread. I don't understand, she said. D.R.? That's David Rodriguez. But he changed his name to Cruz when he became an American citizen. But E.R.? That's not me. My initials are A.C., Amanda Cruz. Frank and Raymond exchanged a glance, and Amanda could see that Frank had suspected this possibility, had been preparing for this moment since their conversation the day before. Mrs. Cruz, Frank said gently, I think this ring was from David's first marriage. E.R. would be Elizabeth Rose, the woman who died in the London Blitz. Amanda felt the floor seem to shift beneath her feet. But David wore this ring our entire marriage, for 35 years. I watched him put it on every morning, take it off every night. It was our ring. Raymond, who had been listening to this exchange with growing fascination, spoke up quietly. Mrs. Cruz, if I may, sometimes people continue wearing rings from previous relationships, not because they're being deceptive, but because those rings carry memories they're not ready to let go of. It doesn't necessarily diminish what the ring came to represent in your marriage. But Amanda wasn't comforted by Raymond's gentle explanation. She was remembering 35 years of mornings when David had put on that ring, 35 years of assuming it symbolized his commitment to her. Had he been thinking of Elizabeth every time he looked at it? Had their entire marriage been shadowed by the memory of the women who had died in the war? Mrs. Cruz, are you all right? Frank's voice seemed to come from very far away. Amanda realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face as the magnitude of this revelation hit her. The ring she had fought to recover, the symbol of her marriage that she had treasured for 2 years since David's death, was actually a monument to David's first love, the woman whose memory he had apparently carried throughout their life together. I need to sit down, she said quietly. Raymond immediately guided her to a chair near the windows, while Frank poured her a glass of water from a crystal pitcher on a nearby table. Mrs. Cruz, Raymond said, his voice much softer than it was when they arrived, I want you to know that this discovery doesn't change my understanding of the ring's significance to you. You lived with it, loved with it, built a marriage around it. That history is just as valid as its original history. Amanda looked up at him through her tears, surprised by the compassion in his voice. But it wasn't really mine, was it? It was never really mine. Frank knelt beside her chair. Mrs. Cruz, may I offer a different perspective? David chose to wear that ring throughout your marriage. He could have put it away, could have bought a new ring, could have told you its history, but he chose to let it become part of your story together. In a way, he was honoring both his marriages, both his loves. That's not betrayal. That's the complexity of a human heart that was large enough to hold multiple kinds of love. Amanda wiped her eyes from the tissue Raymond offered her and looked around Raymond's apartment again at all these beautiful objects that he had collected and preserved, each with its own history and story. Mr. Silver, she said finally, why do you collect these things? Raymond was quiet for a moment, considering her question. I suppose I collect them because I believe beautiful things shouldn't be lost. Every piece in this apartment represents someone's craftsmanship, someone's love, someone's story. When I preserve them, I'm preserving all that history. Amanda nodded slowly. And David's ring? What story does it preserve? It preserves the story of a man who loved deeply twice in his life. It preserves the memory of Elizabeth Rose, who died too young in a terrible war.
and it preserves the story of your marriage. 35 years of daily commitment symbolized by David's decision to keep wearing it. That's not one story, that's two stories, intertwined. Amanda looked at the ring, still resting in Raymond's palm, and realized that her understanding of everything, David, their marriage, the ring itself, had changed completely in the space of a few minutes. The simple gold band she thought represented the beginning of her love story was actually the continuation of another story that had been interrupted by tragedy and then found new life in David's second chance at happiness. "What happens now?" she asked, looking between Frank and Raymond. Raymond closed his fingers around the ring, not possessively, but protectively, like someone holding something fragile and precious. "Now," he said, "I think we all need to understand the complete story before we decide what should happen to this ring. Mrs. Cruz, would you be willing to help me research David's history? I'd like to learn about Elizabeth Rose, about their life in London, about how this ring survived the war. And I'd like to document your story too, how David came to America, how you met, what this ring meant in your marriage." Amanda looked at Frank, who nodded encouragingly. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that we give this ring the respect its history deserves, all its history, and then we figure out where it belongs." The silence in Amanda's house felt different when she returned from Raymond Silver's penthouse. It was no longer the comfortable quiet of routine, nor the anxious emptiness of loss, but something heavier, the silence of secrets revealed and assumptions shattered. Amanda moved through her familiar rooms like a stranger, seeing everything through the lens of what she had just discovered about David and the ring that had never truly been hers. She went directly to their bedroom, to the closet that had remained largely untouched since David's death. His clothes still hung there, the work shirts he'd worn to the engineering firm, the Sunday suits that had grown too big on him during his illness, the casual clothes they had bought together for their retirement years. Amanda had kept meaning to donate them, but something had always stopped her. Now she understood that some part of her had known there were still discoveries to be made. David had been a methodical man, organized in the way that engineers often were, but he had also been private about certain things. Amanda knew there were boxes and papers in the back of the closet that she had never examined closely, respecting his need for some corners of his life to remain his own. But privacy was a luxury she could no longer afford, not when understanding David's past had become essential to understanding her own future. The first box she pulled out contained immigration documents, David's naturalization papers, his British passport from 1952, work permits, and employment records from his early years in America. Amanda spread these across their bed, studying them in the late afternoon light that slanted through their bedroom windows. Here was the paper trail of David's transformation from David Rodriguez, British subject, to David Cruz, an American citizen. He found his discharge papers from the British Army, dated 1946, and a letter for recommendation from his commanding officer, praising his exemplary service during the most difficult period of the war. There were certificates from engineering schools, evidence of the education he had pursued after the war, and correspondence with American employers who had eventually sponsored his immigration. But it was the second box that contained the secrets. Hidden beneath a layer of old tax returns and insurance papers, Amanda found a smaller box. A woman's jewelry box, actually, made of rosewood with brass corners, the kind that might have sat on a dressing table in a London bedroom in the 1940s. Amanda's hands trembled as she lifted it from its hiding.
"Much in your letters, but please try to stay safe. I have such plans for us when this awful war is over." Amanda set down the letter, unable to continue. Elizabeth's voice was so vivid, so alive on the page, that it felt like an intrusion to read her private thoughts to her husband. But it also helped Amanda understand something crucial about David. He had been deeply, completely loved by someone else before her, and he had loved just as deeply in return. She picked up another photograph, this one showing David and Elizabeth in what appeared to be their flat. Elizabeth was cooking something on a small stove, while David sat at a tiny table, papers spread before him. It was such an ordinary domestic scene, the kind of moment that happened thousands of times during a marriage. but someone had thought it worth preserving. On the back, Elizabeth had written, "David working on his engineering correspondence courses while I attempt to make something edible from our rations. He claims to love my cooking, but I suspect he's just being gallant. October 1943. Amanda continued through the box, finding more letters, more photographs, and small mementos that told the story of 9 months of marriage, interrupted by war. There was a program from a concert they had attended, a pressed flower that might have been from Elizabeth's wedding bouquet, and a small notebook in David's handwriting where he had apparently been learning Elizabeth's favorite things. She preferred tea to coffee, loved mystery novels, laughed at Charlie Chaplin films, and dreamed of traveling to America after the war. It was in this notebook that Amanda found the most devastating entry, dated February 14th, 1944. Elizabeth is pregnant. She told me this morning, and I have never felt such joy and terror at the same time. Joy because I can't imagine anything more wonderful than having a child with her. Terror because the bombing has been getting worse, and I can't bear the thought of anything happening to them. I've written to my commander asking for home leave, but I don't know if it will be approved. Elizabeth laughs at my worrying and tells me that women have been having babies during wars for thousands of years, but I can't shake the feeling that I should be there to protect them. We've decided that if it's a boy, we'll name him Thomas, after her father. If it's a girl, Margaret, after mine. Elizabeth says either way, the baby will be lucky to have such distinguished namesakes. Amanda's hands shook as she read this entry. Elizabeth had been pregnant when she died. David had lost not just his wife, but his unborn child as well. The magnitude of his loss suddenly seemed unbearable, and Amanda understood why David had never spoken of this time in his life. How could anyone find words for such devastating grief? The last letter in the bundle was different from the others. It was written in David's handwriting, addressed to Elizabeth, but it had never been sent. The envelope was sealed, and across the front, David had written, "For Elizabeth, if I don't come home." Amanda stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. This was David's final letter to his first wife, the words he had wanted her to have if he had been the one to die in the war. Reading it felt like the ultimate violation of David's privacy, but Amanda realized that understanding David completely might require this final transgression. My beloved Elizabeth, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are still in the world, which is as it should be. You are the best of us, the brightest light I have ever known, and the world needs your light more than it needs mine. I want you to know that every day with you has been a gift I never expected to receive. When I first saw you at the hospital, helping those injured children with such tenderness and skill, I knew I was looking at someone extraordinary, that you chose to love me, that you agreed to marry me, that you have made these months of war bearable with your laughter and your courage. These are miracles I will carry with me into whatever comes next. I need you to promise me something, my darling. I need you to promise that you will live fully, that you will love again if the opportunity comes. Don't let grief make you small. Don't let my death be the end of your story. Find someone who will cherish you the way you deserve to be cherished. Someone who will make you laugh the way I made you laugh. The ring I gave you was my grandmother's. She would have loved you completely, just as I do. Keep it or don't keep it, as feels right to you. But remember that love is never wasted, even when it ends too soon. What we have had together will always be real, will always matter, regardless of what the future holds. All my love. Always. David. Amanda folded the letter carefully and sat in the gathering dusk of her bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of David's secret grief. She understood now why he continued wearing his ring from Elizabeth throughout their marriage. It wasn't betrayal. It was fidelity to the deepest kind of loss. David had loved Elizabeth completely, and when she died, he honored that love by carrying her memory forward into his new life. But he had also loved Amanda completely, in a different way, shaped by different circumstances and different stages of life. His love for Elizabeth didn't diminish what he had shared with Amanda. It gave context to the depth of his capacity for devotion, the way he had learned to hold both joy and sorrow simultaneously. The phone rang, startling Amanda from her reverie. She glanced at the clock and realized it was nearly 8 o'clock. She had been reading through David's papers for hours. Hello? Mama, it's Emma. I've been worried about you all day. How did the meeting with the collector go? Amanda looked around the bedroom, at the photographs of David and Elizabeth scattered across the bedspread, at the letters that revealed a chapter of David's life she had never known existed. Emma, she said quietly, I think you should come over. There are some things about your father that I need to share with you. What kind of things? You're scaring me. I'm not sure scared is the right word. Surprised, maybe. Humbled, certainly. Can you come tonight and bring Sophia if she's feeling well enough? This is family history, and she should hear it too. After Emma agreed to come over, Amanda called Frank Kowalski. Mrs. Cruz, I was hoping you'd call. How are you processing what we learned today? I've been going through David's papers. Frank, there's so much more to this story than we realized. David and Elizabeth were only married 9 months, but they packed a lifetime of love into those months. And, Frank, she was pregnant when she died. There was silence on the other end of the line as Frank absorbed this information. Mrs. Cruz, I've been doing some research of my own today. I contacted a colleague in London who specializes in wartime jewelry, and she was able to tell me about the maker's mark on David's ring. It was made by a jeweler called Hartwell & Sons in Hatton Garden, the jewelry district in London. The shop was destroyed during the Blitz, but they were known for their exceptional craftsmanship and for their work with unusual gold alloys. What does that mean for the ring's value? It means that Raymond Silver was right about its significance. Hartwell & Sons pieces are extremely rare now, partly because of the shop's destruction, and partly because they used gold compositions that were unique to their workshop. A ring like David's, if it can be authenticated as a Hartwell piece, could be worth significantly more than $25,000 Raymond estimated. Amanda absorbed this information, adding it to everything else she had learned about the ring's complex history. Frank, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Based on what you know about collectors like Raymond Silver, what are the chances that he'll give the ring back willingly? Frank was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Cruz, I think today changed something for Raymond. Seeing your reaction to learning about Elizabeth, understanding the full emotional weight of the ring's history, I think it affected him more than he expected. He's not a heartless person. He's someone who collects beautiful things because he believes they should be preserved and appreciated. The question is whether he sees himself as the best custodian of the ring, or whether he can be convinced that it belongs with you. And what do you think? I think the answer to that question depends on how we present your case. If we approach him as adversaries, demanding that he return stolen property, he'll probably refuse. But if we approach him as fellow guardians of the ring's history, people who want to ensure that David and Elizabeth's story is properly honored, he might be willing to work with us. After Amanda hung up with Frank, she gathered David's papers and photographs, organizing them chronologically, and trying to piece together the complete story of David's first marriage. She wanted to understand not just—
Amanda looked at her granddaughter, this 16-year-old girl who was old enough to understand complex emotional truths, and realized that Sophia's question was the heart of everything. "I don't know," Amanda said honestly. "Part of me feels like I have no right to it, now that I know it's real history. But part of me feels like I have every right to it, because I lived with it for 35 years, because it was part of my daily life with David." Emma reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I sold the ring, and I'm sorry I didn't understand what it meant to you. But I'm also sorry that learning its real history has made everything more complicated instead of less. It's not your fault that it's complicated, Mija. Love is always complicated. Marriage is always complicated. Family history is always more complex than it appears on the surface." They spent the next 2 hours going through David's papers together, with Amanda sharing what she had learned, and Emma and Sophia asking questions about this grandfather and great-grandfather they were discovering for the first time. Sophia was particularly fascinated by the photographs of David in his army uniform, and she kept returning to the images of David and Elizabeth in their London flat. "They look like people in a movie," Sophia said, "like they're living in some romantic story." "They were living in a romantic story," Amanda said. "It just ended too soon." As the evening wore on, Amanda found herself telling David's story differently than she had experienced it. Instead of feeling betrayed by his secret past, she began to feel proud of his capacity for love, impressed by his ability to honor Elizabeth's memory while building a new life with Amanda. David hadn't been living a lie, he had been living a complex truth, holding multiple stories simultaneously. "Mama," Emma said as they prepared to leave, "what are you going to do about the ring? Are you going to keep fighting for it?" Amanda looked around the dining room table, at the photographs and letters that revealed David's complete story, not just the part she had lived with him, but the part that had shaped him before they met. "I'm going to do what David would have wanted," she said. "I'm going to make sure both stories are honored, Elizabeth's and mine, and then we'll see what feels right." After Emma and Sophia left, Amanda carefully repacked David's papers, but she kept out the wedding photograph of David and Elizabeth. She placed it on her dresser, next to her own wedding photograph with David, and studied them in the lamplight. Two couples, separated by a decade and an ocean, but connected by one man's capacity for love. For the first time since discovering the ring was missing, Amanda felt something other than loss or anger. She felt curiosity about what would happen next, and a strange kind of peace about the complexity of the story she was living. David's love for Elizabeth didn't diminish his love for Amanda, it gave context to the depth of devotion he had been capable of offering. Tomorrow, she would call Raymond Silver and tell him that she wanted to continue her conversation about the ring's future. But tonight, she would sit with these new truths, these expanded understandings of love and loss, and the ways that the past could reshape the present in unexpected ways. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, one of those autumn days when the light seemed to sharpen every detail and make the world appear more vivid than usual. Amanda woke early, as had become her habit since David's death, but instead of the familiar ritual of reaching for his ring, she found herself reaching for the wedding photograph of David and Elizabeth that she had placed on her nightstand the evening before. Looking at Elizabeth's face in the morning light, Amanda tried to imagine what it would have been like to be 23 years old and in love during the London Blitz, to be building a life while bombs fell around you, to be pregnant with your first child while your husband was stationed somewhere dangerous and unknown. Elizabeth had lived through experiences Amanda could barely comprehend, loved David in circumstances that tested the very foundations of hope and faith. Amanda made her morning tea, chamomile, as always, and called Emma. "Mama, is everything all right? It's only 7 o'clock. "I'm fine, Mija. I was wondering if you and Sophia could come over this morning. I want to talk to you both about what we discovered last night, and I want to plan what we're going to do next." "What we're going to do next?" "About the ring, about Mr. Silver, about making sure this story ends the right way."
Emma was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee and looking out the kitchen window at the maple tree in Amanda's backyard, its leaves just beginning to turn gold. "Mama, I need to say something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you respond." Amanda nodded, recognizing the tone Emma used when she was preparing to say something difficult. "I've been thinking about what I did selling the ring, and I realize now that it wasn't just about the money. I mean, it was about the money. Sophia's medication costs are crushing me, and I've been working so many hours that I barely see her. But it was also about feeling angry at you for having something that represented security and permanence when I was struggling to keep our lives together. I looked at that ring and I saw something that just sat in a box while I was struggling to keep our lives together. I saw something from the past when I needed help in the present. And I think I was angry at Dad, too, for dying and leaving you with a pension and Social Security while I'm drowning in debt and responsibility." Sophia reached for her mother's hand, and Amanda could see tears in Emma's eyes. "I'm not trying to justify what I did. I'm trying to explain that it came from a place of desperation and resentment that I didn't even understand myself. And now knowing that the ring was really Elizabeth's ring, that it has this whole history I never knew about, I feel like I stumbled into the middle of a story that's much bigger than my problems." Amanda got up from her chair and moved to stand behind Emma, placing her hands on Emma's shoulders. "Mija, I need you to understand something. The reason I have financial security isn't because your father loved me more or provided for me better. It's because I married him when he was already established in his career, when we could plan for retirement together. You married Mark when you were both young and struggling, and then you've been raising Sophia mostly alone since the divorce. Your circumstances are harder than mine were, not because you've made worse choices, but because life is sometimes unfair. But I should have asked for help instead of taking the ring. Yes, you should have asked for help, but I should have offered it more clearly, should have made sure you knew that you could come to me when things got difficult." Sophia looked between her mother and grandmother and spoke quietly. "Maybe this whole thing happened because our family needed to have some honest conversations that we've been avoiding." Amanda and Emma both looked at Sophia, struck by her insight. "What do you mean?" Amanda asked. "I mean, Mom has been pretending that she can handle everything alone, and Abuela, you've been pretending that you don't worry about us, and I've been pretending that I don't feel guilty about being expensive to take care of. Maybe losing the ring forced us to stop pretending about things." Amanda sat back down at the table, looking at these two women, her daughter and granddaughter, who were both struggling with challenges that she hadn't fully understood. "Sophia, you are not a burden. Your medical needs are not something you chose, and caring for you is not a sacrifice. It's what families do for each other. But it is expensive," Sophia said matter-of-factly, "and Mom works all the time to pay for it, and she's tired and stressed, and I see how hard it is for her."
Emma wiped her eyes with her napkin. "Sweetheart, taking care of you is the most important thing I'll ever do. I'm not working all the time because I resent your medical needs. I'm working all the time because I love you, and I want you to have every possible chance at a healthy life." "But you shouldn't have to do it alone," Amanda said. "Emma, I want to help with Sophia's medical expenses. I have savings, and I have David's life insurance money that I've barely touched. I was keeping it for emergencies, but what could be more of an emergency than my granddaughter's health?" "Mama, I can't take your money." "You're not taking it. I'm offering it. There's a difference." They spent the next hour having the kind of honest conversation that Amanda realized they should have been having for years. Emma explained the reality of her financial situation, the medical bills that insurance didn't cover, the student loans she was still paying off, the constant calculation of whether she could afford groceries and rent and Sophia's medications in the same month. Sophia talked about feeling guilty for needing so much medical care, about watching her mother work herself to exhaustion, about sometimes wishing she could just be a normal teenager whose biggest worry was homework and boys. Amanda shared her own fears about aging alone, about becoming a burden to Emma and Sophia, about not knowing how to help her family without interfering in their independence. She talked about the loneliness of widowhood, the way grief could make every decision feel weighted with significance, the comfort she had found in David's ring as a tangible connection to their shared history. By the time Frank Kowalski called back, they had reached an understanding that felt different from anything they had shared before. Not perfect, not without ongoing challenges, but honest in a way that their family relationships had needed to be for a long time. Mrs. Cruz, I spoke with Raymond Silver, and he's available to meet with you and your family this afternoon at 3 o'clock. He seemed very interested in hearing more about David and Elizabeth's story. Thank you, Frank. We'll be ready. After hanging up, Amanda looked at Emma and Sophia. Are you both prepared to do this? To go back to Mr. Silver's apartment and tell him our complete story? I'm nervous, Sophia admitted. He seemed kind of intimidating when you described him. He's intimidating because he's wealthy and lives in a penthouse. But from what you've told us, Mama, he's not a bad person. He's someone who appreciates beautiful things and understands their value. What are we going to ask him for, exactly? Sophia asked. Amanda thought about this question, realizing that her answer had evolved significantly over the past few days. We're going to ask him to help us honor the ring's complete history. Elizabeth's story, David's story, our family story. And then we're going to ask him to help us decide what should happen to the ring next. What if he says he wants to keep it? Then we'll respect that decision, but we'll ask him to help us document its history so that both stories, Elizabeth's and ours, are preserved. Emma nodded slowly. And if he decides to give it back, then we'll figure out together how to honor both stories, how to make sure Elizabeth's memory is respected while also acknowledging what the ring has meant to our family. As they prepared to leave for Raymond Silver's apartment, Amanda looked around her kitchen, the same kitchen where she had sat in despair just a few days earlier, devastated by the discovery that David's ring was missing. She felt like a different person now, not because her circumstances had changed dramatically, but because her understanding of those circumstances had deepened and broadened. The ring was still in Raymond Silver's possession, David was still gone, Emma was still struggling financially, and Sophia was still dealing with chronic illness. But their family had found a way to be honest with each other about their struggles and their love. And Amanda had discovered that David's capacity for love had been even greater than she had understood. Whatever happened with the ring, Amanda realized, this experience had given them something valuable, a deeper understanding of each other, and a more complete picture of the man whose love had shaped all their lives. Are we ready? Emma asked, gathering her purse and helping Sophia with her jacket. We're ready, Amanda said, picking up the folder of David's papers and photographs that she had prepared for Raymond Silver. Let's go. Tell the complete story. The elevator ride to Raymond Silver's penthouse felt different this time. Instead of Amanda's nervous anxiety during her first visit, there was a sense of purpose that seemed to fill the small space. Emma stood close to her mother, occasionally glancing at the folder of documents Amanda carried, while Sophia stared wide-eyed at the brass buttons and mirrored walls, clearly intimidated by the level of luxury they were entering. Remember, Amanda said quietly as they rose past the 20th floor, we're not here to demand anything. We're here to share a story and ask for help in deciding what should happen next. When the elevator doors opened directly into Raymond's apartment, Sophia gasped audibly at the panoramic view of the city. Emma's eyes went immediately to the display cases filled with carefully arranged artifacts, each piece spotlighted and labeled like museum exhibits. Raymond greeted them at the elevator, dressed casually but expensively, in dark slacks and a pale blue cashmere sweater. Amanda noticed that he seemed less formal than during their previous meeting, more genuinely welcoming. Mrs. Cruz, it's good to see you again, and you must be Emma and Sophia. He shook hands with each of them, his manner warm but respectful. Thank you for coming. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I'm very interested in learning more about your family's connection to the ring. Frank Kowalski was already there, seated in one of the comfortable chairs near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a briefcase at his feet, and several reference books spread on the coffee table. I took the liberty of bringing some additional research materials, Frank explained as they settled into the seating area. After our conversation yesterday, I contacted several colleagues in London, and we've learned quite a bit more about the ring's origins. Sophia sat on the edge of her chair, clearly fascinated by the apartment's contents. Mr. Silver, how long have you been collecting these things? Raymond smiled at her directness. About 10 years now. I started after my divorce, when I had an empty apartment and too much time on my hands. At first, I just bought things because I liked them, but gradually I became more interested in the stories behind the objects. What kinds of stories? Sophia asked. Well, take that pocket watch over there. Raymond pointed to a display case near the window. It belonged to a railroad conductor in the 1920s. His granddaughter brought it to an estate sale because she didn't know its value, but when I researched it, I discovered that the conductor had been involved in several famous train rescues. The watch had been with him during moments when he'd helped save lives. Amanda watched Sophia's face as Raymond explained his collecting philosophy, and she could see her granddaughter's curiosity overcoming her nervousness. So, you don't just collect things because they're valuable? Value is relative, Raymond said. A piece can be worth a lot of money, but have no emotional resonance, or it can be worth very little financially, but carry tremendous personal significance. The best pieces have both kinds of value. Emma had been quietly studying the display case that contained David's ring, and now she spoke up. Mr. Silver, may we see the ring again? I'd like to show Sophia what we're talking about. Raymond nodded and retrieved the ring from its case, handling it with the same careful respect Amanda remembered from their previous meeting. When he placed it in Sophia's palm, Amanda watched her granddaughter's expression change as she felt the weight of it, saw the way the afternoon light caught the gold. It's beautiful, Sophia said softly, and it feels, I don't know, important somehow? That's exactly right, Raymond said. Quality craftsmanship has a weight and presence that you can feel, even if you don't know anything about jewelry. Amanda opened the folder that she had brought and spread David's photographs and documents on the coffee table. Mr. Silver, we've learned a great deal about the ring's history since yesterday, and we wanted to share it with you. For the next hour, Amanda told the complete story she had pieced together from David's papers. She showed Raymond and Frank the photographs of David and Elizabeth, shared Elizabeth's letters, and read portions of David's unsent letter to his first wife. Emma filled in details about their family history, about David's transformation from David Rodriguez to David Cruz, about the life he had built in America after losing everything in London. Sophia proved to be an unexpectedly effective narrator, describing how it felt to discover that their grandfather had been someone entirely different before they knew him, how the ring carried two complete love stories instead of just one. Raymond listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and examining the photographs with obvious fascination. Amanda noticed that his demeanor became more engaged as the story unfolded, less like someone evaluating a business proposition, and more like someone becoming emotionally invested in the outcome. This is remarkable, Raymond said. Mrs. Cruz, you've essentially uncovered a complete wartime love story that was hidden for 70 years. The ring isn't just a piece of vintage jewelry, it's a tangible connection to real people who lived through extraordinary circumstances. Frank pulled out.
Yesterday, when you had that reaction to learning about Elizabeth, when you realized that the ring carried a story you'd never known, I saw something I'd never seen before. I saw what it looked like when an object was reunited with its true context, with the people who understood its complete significance. Emma leaned forward in her chair. What do you mean? I mean that all of these objects in my collection have stories, but I only know fragments of those stories. I own them, but I don't really understand them the way you understand this ring. Sophia spoke up, her voice thoughtful. So you're like a museum, but a museum that only one person ever gets to visit? Raymond turned from the window and smiled at her. That's exactly what I'm like, Sophia, and that's the problem. Frank was nodding slowly, understanding where Raymond's thoughts were leading. Raymond, are you reconsidering your approach to collecting? I'm reconsidering this specific piece, Raymond said. This ring belongs with people who understand its complete story, who can honor both Elizabeth's memory and your family's history with it. Amanda felt her heart begin to race, but she forced herself to remain calm. Mr. Silver, what are you saying? I'm saying that I'd like to return the ring to you, Mrs. Cruz, but I'd like to propose something in exchange. What kind of exchange? Emma asked, her voice cautious. Raymond returned to his chair and picked up the photographs of David and Elizabeth. I'd like to help you document the ring's complete history, Elizabeth and David's story, your marriage with David, everything we've learned about its craftsmanship and historical significance. I'd like to create a proper historical record that preserves all of these stories. And then what? Amanda asked. And then I'd like you to consider donating that documentation to a historical society or museum so that other people can learn about this remarkable love story that survived a world war and crossed an ocean. Sophia looked confused. You want to give us back the ring, but you want us to give away the story? I want you to keep the ring and share the story, Raymond clarified. I want the ring to go home with you, where it belongs, but I want Elizabeth and David's story to be preserved somewhere that researchers and historians can access it. Amanda looked at Emma and Sophia, then at Frank, trying to process this unexpected proposal. Mr. Silver, that's very generous, but I have to ask, why? Why would you give up something that you clearly value and that's worth so much money? Raymond was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability that Amanda hadn't heard before. Mrs. Cruz, my ex-wife used to say that I collected beautiful things because I was afraid of beautiful experiences. She said I preferred to own objects rather than participate in relationships because objects couldn't disappoint me or leave me. He gestured around the apartment at his carefully arranged displays. She was right. All of this collecting has been a way of controlling beauty, of possessing it, without risking it. But watching your family's reaction to this ring, seeing what it means when an object is truly connected to the people who love it, that's shown me what I've been missing. Amanda was crying quietly, and Sophia reached over to hold her mother's hand. Mr. Silver, Amanda said, are you certain about this decision? Once you give the ring back, you can't change your mind. I'm certain, Raymond said. But Mrs. Cruz, I have one request. What's that? I'd like to stay involved in documenting the ring's history. I'd like to help you create a record that honors Elizabeth's memory appropriately. And I'd like to visit the ring sometimes, to see it in its proper context with your family. Sophia looked up suddenly, her face bright with an idea. Mr. Silver, what if we became like an honorary family member? Like, what if we helped you take care of the ring's history, and we helped you understand what it means to be connected to something instead of just owning it? Amanda looked at her granddaughter with amazement. In a few simple sentences, Sophia had articulated a solution that honored everyone's needs and created something new from this complicated situation. Sophia, that's a beautiful idea, Amanda said. Mr. Silver, would you like to be part of our extended family? Would you like to help us be good stewards of this ring and its stories? Raymond looked around his apartment again at all the beautiful objects he had collected in isolation, then looked back at this 3-generation family that had just invited him to be part of something real and ongoing. Mrs. Cruz, I would be honored to be part of your family's story, he said, picking up David's ring and holding it out to Amanda. and I'd like to start by returning this to where it belongs." As Amanda took the ring from Raymond's hand, feeling its familiar weight for the first time in days, she realized that this ending was better than anything she could have imagined when the journey began. The ring was home, but they had also gained something unexpected: a deeper understanding of love's complexity, a stronger family bond, and a new friend who understood the difference between owning beautiful things and being part of beautiful stories. "Thank you," Amanda said simply, sliding the ring onto the chain around her neck where it had lived for 2 years. The weight of David's ring against Amanda's chest felt different than it had before, not lighter or heavier, but somehow more complete, as if it had returned to her carrying additional stories rather than just the familiar comfort of memory. As they left Raymond Silver's penthouse apartment that afternoon, Amanda found herself touching the chain occasionally, reassuring herself that the ring was really there, really home. "Mama, are you okay?" Emma asked as they waited for the elevator. "I'm processing," Amanda said honestly. "A week ago, I thought I understood everything about this ring, about David, about our marriage. Now I feel like I'm meeting my husband all over again." Sophia was carrying the folder of David's papers and photographs, having asked if she could be responsible for organizing them when they got home. "Abuela, do you think Abuelo David would be happy about what happened today?" Amanda considered the question as they descended 32 floors towards street level. "I think he would be amazed that his secrets led to something beautiful instead of something painful. And I think he would be proud of you for seeing solutions that the adults missed." In the taxi ride home, Raymond Silver sat in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by his collection, but feeling more alone than he had in years. The decision to return the ring felt absolutely right in the moment, but now, in the silence of his carefully curated space, he was questioning everything about the life he had built since his divorce. He walked to the display case where David's ring had lived for less than a week, seeing the empty velvet-lined space as a metaphor for something larger. For 10 years, he had filled his apartment with beautiful objects, telling himself that he was preserving history and protecting things of value. But Amanda Cruz and her family had shown him the difference between preservation and connection, between owning something and understanding it. Raymond picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in several months. "Janet, it's Raymond. I know it's been a while. I wanted to ask you something. Do you remember what you used to say about my collecting? About how I preferred objects to relationships?" His ex-wife's voice was cautious, but not unfriendly. "I remember. Is everything all right, Raymond?" "I think I'm finally understanding what you meant. Janet, what would you say if I told you I just gave away a piece worth $40,000 because it belonged with the family who understood its story?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I'd say that sounds like growth," Janet said. "Finally, what brought this on?" Raymond found himself telling Janet about Amanda and Emma and Sophia, about David's ring and Elizabeth's memory, about the difference between collecting objects and being part of stories. As he talked, he realized that this was the first time in years that he had shared something meaningful with another person, the first time he had prioritized connection over control. "Raymond, I'm proud of you," Janet said. "This sounds like the beginning of a different kind of life." "I think it is. Janet, Would you like to have dinner sometime? Not because I want to get back together, but because I think I'm finally learning how to be a friend instead of just a collector." After hanging up with Janet, Raymond walked through his apartment, seeing his collection with new eyes. Each piece still beautiful, still valuable, still worthy of preservation, but also isolated, disconnected from the continuing stories that gave objects meaning beyond their material worth. He sat down at his computer and began drafting an email to several museum curators he knew, proposing a new kind of exhibition, one that would reunite collectors' objects with the families who had personal connections to them, creating displays that honored both historical significance and ongoing emotional resonance. Amanda's house had been transformed into a research center. The dining room table was covered with David's papers, Elizabeth's photographs, and the notes that Frank Kowalski had provided about the ring's craftsmanship and historical context. Sophia had appointed herself the project's archive. Over the following weeks, Amanda's house became the center of an unexpected collaboration. Professional archivists arrived to photograph and digitize David's papers. Historians interviewed Amanda about her memories of David, their marriage, and her discovery of his past. Emma shared her perspective on growing up with a father who had carried hidden grief, and Sophia provided insights about what it meant to discover that family history was more complex than she had understood. Raymond visited several times, not as a collector evaluating objects, but as someone learning to be part of a continuing story. He brought expertise about preserving historical materials, but he also brought genuine curiosity about Amanda's experience and real affection for Sophia's observations about family dynamics. "Mr. Silver," Sophia said during one of his visits, "I've been thinking about your apartment. All those beautiful things, but no pictures of family or friends. Don't you get lonely?" Raymond's answer surprised everyone, including himself. "I've been lonely for years, Sophia. I just didn't want to admit it. But being part of this project, helping document your grandfather's story, this is the first time in a long time that I felt connected to something larger than my own interests." The documentation project revealed unexpected dimensions of David's story. Through military records and immigration documents, they traced his journey from London to New York to the Midwest, where he had rebuilt his career and eventually met Amanda. They discovered that David had briefly worked with a refugee resettlement organization, helping other European immigrants navigate American bureaucracy, perhaps his way of processing his own displacement and loss. Most significantly, they found evidence that David had donated money anonymously to London war memorials for years after Elizabeth's death, ensuring that the victims of the Blitz were remembered and honored. He had never told Amanda about these donations, but the canceled checks were there in his papers, a private ritual of remembrance that had continued throughout their marriage. "He never forgot her," Amanda said when they made this discovery, "but he didn't let his grief stop him from building a new life." "That's what love looks like sometimes, Emma said, holding on to what matters while still moving forward. The financial crisis that had triggered this entire journey was quietly resolved during these weeks. Raymond, without making a public announcement about it, established a medical fund for Sophia's care, structured as a scholarship for young people with chronic illnesses who demonstrated academic promise. Sophia would be the fund's first recipient, ensuring that her treatment needs would be met without Emma having to work crushing hours or make desperate decisions. "Mr. Silver," Emma protested when she learned about the fund, "this is too much." "It's not too much," Raymond said. "It's what the ring would have been worth if I had kept it and sold it eventually. This way, instead of the money disappearing into my investment portfolio, it's creating ongoing value for families who need help." Sophia, characteristically direct, asked the question that Amanda and Emma were thinking but not voicing. "Mr. Silver, why are you doing all this for us? We're basically strangers who showed up asking for something that belonged to you." Raymond considered her questions seriously. "Sophia, for 10 years, I've been collecting beautiful things and keeping them to myself. You and your family taught me that the most beautiful thing about any object is its capacity to connect people to each other. This fund, this documentation project, getting to know your family, this is the first time I've used my resources to create connections instead of just acquiring possessions." As the documentation project neared completion, Amanda found herself changed by the process of examining David's life so thoroughly. She understood now that his capacity for love hadn't been diminished by his experience with Elizabeth. It had been deepened by it. David had learned to hold joy and sorrow simultaneously, to honor the past while embracing the present, to love fully while understanding that love could be temporary. "I think I was afraid," Amanda confessed to Emma one evening as they worked on organizing the final documents. "When I first learned about Elizabeth, I was afraid that David's love for her meant his love for me was somehow less real. And now I understand that David's love for me was more remarkable because he chose it after experiencing such loss. He could have closed his heart after Elizabeth died, could have decided that loving deeply was too dangerous. Instead, he chose to love me completely, knowing what love could cost." Frank Kowalski, who had become a regular presence at Amanda's house during the documentation process, made an observation that surprised everyone. "Mrs. Cruz, you know that this experience has changed you in ways that go beyond recovering the ring." Amanda looked up from the photograph she was studying, one of David and Elizabeth dancing at what appeared to be a wartime party, both of them laughing despite the uncertainty surrounding them. "How do you mean?" "Well, you've become someone who understands how to research family history, how to preserve important stories, how to help families navigate complicated emotional and historical territory. Have you considered that this might be something you could do for other people?" Amanda had been so focused on David's story that she hadn't considered the possibility that her experience could help others facing similar discoveries. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that you might want to consider working with me," Frank said. "I get calls all the time from families who have lost heirlooms, who have discovered unexpected family histories, and who need help figuring out how to preserve or recover important objects. Most of them need someone who understands both the practical and emotional aspects of these situations." Sophia looked up from her timeline project with excitement. "Abuela, you could be like a family history detective." "I don't know anything about being a professional researcher," Amanda protested. "You know about being a family member who cares deeply about preserving what matters," Emma said. "And you know what it feels like to discover that family history is more complex than you had understood. That might be more valuable than professional training." Amanda considered this possibility as she looked around her dining room, transformed over the past weeks into a space where past and present intersected, where hidden stories had been brought to light, where strangers had become family through the shared work of understanding and preservation. The ring hung around her neck, no longer just a symbol of her marriage to David, but a tangible connection to a larger story of love, loss, resilience, and the unexpected ways that the past could enrich the present. Elizabeth's love for David hadn't diminished Amanda's love for him. It had provided context for the depth of commitment he had been capable of offering. David's grief hadn't overshadowed his capacity for joy. It had given weight and meaning to the happiness he had chosen to build with Amanda. "Frank," Amanda said finally, "I think I'd like to learn more about helping other families, but I want Sophia to be part of it too. She has insights about family dynamics that the rest of us miss." Sophia beamed at this suggestion. "Could we really do that? Could we help other people figure out their family mysteries?" "I think," Amanda said, looking around the table at Emma, Sophia, Frank, and Raymond, who had arrived during their conversation, "that we've all learned something about how much richer life becomes when we stop trying to control our stories and start sharing them with people who understand their value." Raymond nodded, settling into the chair that had become his regular seat at Amanda's dining room table. "And I've learned that the most valuable thing you can do with a beautiful object is make sure it stays connected to the people who love it." As the evening progressed, Amanda realized that the crisis that had begun with Emma's desperate decision to sell David's ring had led to discoveries and connections that none of them could have imagined. They had gained not just a deeper understanding of David's past, but a new model for how families could face complicated truths together, how strangers could become allies in preserving what mattered, and how objects could serve as bridges between past and present rather than barriers between people.
The ring was home, but more importantly, they had all found new ways to be at home with each other and with the complex, ongoing stories that made up their shared life. 3 months later, Amanda stood in the community center where she and Frank Kowalski had organized their first family history recovery workshop, watching as 12 families spread photographs, documents, and cherished objects across tables that would soon become centers of discovery and connection. The workshop was the first initiative of what had come to be known as the Heritage Bridge Project, a collaboration between Amanda, Frank, Raymond, and a growing network of historians, collectors, and families committed to reuniting objects with their stories. Mrs. Cruz, Frank said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses and surveying the room with the satisfaction of someone seeing a long-held dream become a reality. Amanda looked around the room at the assembled families, a young couple trying to trace the history of a vintage camera they'd inherited, an elderly man seeking information about his father's military medals, a middle-aged woman who had discovered a cache of letters in her grandmother's attic. Each family carried the same combination of curiosity and uncertainty that Amanda remembered from her own journey of discovery. "Good morning, everyone," Amanda began.
The best kind of Saturday. Frank was working with a family who had brought in military medals that had been stored in a shoebox for decades. The medals belonged to their grandfather, who had served in World War II but had never talked about his experiences. These commendations suggest that your grandfather was involved in the liberation of concentration camps, Frank explained gently. That would explain why he might not have wanted to discuss his service. Many veterans of those experiences found them too difficult to share, even with family. The granddaughter, a woman in her 50s, wiped her eyes as she held the medals. He was always so quiet about the war. We thought maybe he just hadn't done anything important. Sometimes the most important things are the hardest to talk about, Amanda said, joining their conversation. Your grandfather carried those experiences so that you wouldn't have to. That's a different kind of heroism. As the workshop continued, Amanda marveled at how naturally she had grown into this role. 6 months ago, she had been a retired school secretary whose biggest challenge was managing her grief and loneliness. Now, she was someone families trusted with their most precious discoveries, someone who could help them navigate the emotional complexity of uncovering hidden histories. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Amanda had spent months learning about archival research, historical documentation, and the ethical considerations involved in family history work. But more importantly, she had learned to trust her instincts about what families needed when they encountered unexpected truths about their past. "Mrs. Cruz," said Mrs. Patterson, approaching Amanda near the end of the workshop, "I wanted to thank you. When I came here today, I was afraid that my grandmother's letters would contain secrets that would upset me. Instead, I discovered that she was an incredibly strong woman who built a new life in America while staying connected to her roots in Sicily." "That's what family history often teaches us," Amanda replied. "The people who came before us were more complex and more resilient than we imagined." As the families packed up their materials and prepared to leave, many of them carrying research assignments and contact information for specialists who could help them continue their discoveries, Amanda felt the deep satisfaction of work that mattered. Each family would go home with a better understanding of their history, and many would continue working with the Heritage Bridge Project to document and preserve their stories. Raymond was the last to leave, as had become his habit. Over the past 3 months, these Saturday workshops had become the highlight of his week, the time when he felt most connected to meaningful work and genuine relationships. "Amanda, I have something to show you," Raymond said, pulling out his phone and scrolling to a photograph. The image showed a display case in what appeared to be a museum containing David's ring alongside a placard that told the story of David, Elizabeth, and Amanda. The National Museum of American Immigration has agreed to include the ring in their permanent exhibition about love stories that crossed borders, Raymond explained. But it's a traveling display case. The ring spends 3 months there, then 3 months here with you, then 3 months visiting other museums. It's never permanently away from home, but it gets to share its story with people all over the country. Amanda studied the photograph, seeing David's ring in yet another context, not as a private keepsake or a collector's trophy, but as a piece of public history that could help others understand the complex journeys that brought families to America. You arranged this? We all arranged it. The museum was interested because of the documentation we created together. They want to highlight stories that show how immigrants carried their emotional lives across borders, how love and loss shaped the American experience. Sophia appeared beside them, having finished helping Mrs. Patterson translate a particularly challenging portion of her grandmother's letters. "Does this mean our story is going to be in a real museum?" Sophia asked with excitement. "It means your great-grandfather's story, and Elizabeth's story, and your grandmother's story are all going to help other people understand how families are created across time and distance," Raymond replied. Emma joined them, carrying a box of materials from the day's workshop. "Mama, are you ready to head home? I thought we could stop by the grocery store and pick up ingredients for Sunday dinner." "Raymond, Frank, you're both welcome to join us, as usual." These Sunday dinners had become a cherished tradition, bringing together the extended family that had formed around the Heritage Bridge project. Frank usually brought wine and stories about the families he was helping during the week. Raymond contributed his cooking skills, which had improved dramatically since he'd started spending time in Amanda's kitchen. Sophia provided entertainment in the form of updates about her school activities and observations about the adult world that often surprised everyone with their insight. As they prepared to leave the community center, Amanda took a moment to look around the room where so many discoveries had taken place over the past 3 months. Each workshop brought new families, new stories, new connections between past and present. Some families discovered treasures, others uncovered difficult truths, but all of them left with a deeper understanding of their place in the ongoing story of their family's history. "Frank," Amanda said as they turned off the lights, "do you ever regret getting involved in all this? When you helped me with David's ring, you probably didn't expect to end up running workshops every weekend." Frank smiled, adjusting his coat against the November chill. "Amanda, I've been helping people with family treasures for 40 years, but I've never felt like I was making as much difference as I have these past few months. When it was just me working alone, I could help one family at a time. Now, with the workshop model, we're helping dozens of families and training them to help others." Raymond locked his car and walked back to join their conversation. "Plus, we're changing how people think about the relationship between collectors and families. Instead of competition over who gets to keep valuable objects, we're creating collaboration around preserving meaningful stories." As they stood in the parking lot of the community center, Amanda realized that this moment felt like completion. Not the end of their work, but the full realization of something that had begun with loss and confusion and had grown into purpose and connection. 6 months ago, Amanda was a lonely widow whose most precious possession had been taken by her desperate daughter. The betrayal had felt devastating, the loss irreparable. But that crisis had led to discoveries that transformed everyone involved. Emma had learned to ask for help instead of making desperate choices alone. Sophia had found her calling as someone who could help families navigate complicated truths. Raymond had discovered that connection mattered more than possession, and Amanda had become someone who could guide others through the process of understanding their hidden histories. The ring hung around Amanda's neck, no longer just a symbol of her marriage to David, but a reminder of the unexpected ways that loss could lead to growth, that secrets could become gifts, that strangers could become family through the shared work of preserving what mattered. "Same time next week?" Frank asked as they prepared to go to their separate cars. "Same time next week." Amanda confirmed. As she drove home with Emma and Sophia, Amanda reflected on how completely her life had changed since that morning when she had opened her jewelry box to find David's ring missing. The panic and grief of that moment seemed like they belonged to a different person, someone who thought that love was about holding on to things rather than sharing them, someone who believed that understanding the past meant controlling its meanings rather than letting its stories unfold in unexpected ways.
Now, Amanda understood that David's ring had always been meant to travel, to carry its stories from person to person, generation to generation, connecting Elizabeth's love in 1940s London to Amanda's love in contemporary America, to the families who would encounter its story in museums across the country. The ring belonged to all of them, to Elizabeth, who had received it as a symbol of hope during wartime, to David, who had carried it through loss and renewal, To Amanda, who had lived with it through 35 years of marriage, and to everyone who would learn from its story about the persistence of love across time and tragedy. The ring was home, but home had expanded to include Raymond's penthouse and Frank's workshop and the community center where families gathered every Saturday to discover that their histories were richer and more complex than they had imagined. Home was wherever the ring's story was being shared, wherever its capacity to connect people across difference and distance was being honored and preserved. That evening, as Amanda prepared for bed, she performed her familiar ritual of removing David's ring from the chain around her neck. But instead of simply polishing it and placing it in her jewelry box, she held it up to the light and thought about all the hands that had touched it, all the stories it had witnessed, all the love it had symbolized across 8 decades of history. Tomorrow, she would put it on again and wear it to another Heritage Bridge Project workshop, where new families would discover new stories and learn new ways to honor their past while building their future. The ring would continue its journey, carrying its multiple meanings forward into whatever came next, connecting past and present in ways that none of them could have imagined when this story began. Amanda placed the ring in its familiar velvet compartment and closed the jewelry box, but the gesture felt different now, not like an ending, but like a pause between chapters in a story that would continue as long as there were people who understood that love was worth preserving, that families were worth understanding, and that the most precious things in life were meant to be shared rather than simply possessed. Outside her bedroom window, the city settled into sleep, full of families carrying their own hidden histories, their own precious objects, their own opportunities for discovery and connection. Tomorrow would bring new stories, new challenges, new possibilities for turning loss into understanding and isolation into community. The ring was home, and home was wherever love lived on in the stories people chose to tell and share with each other. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.